02:13 a.m. The first thing I noticed wasn't the blood, because there wasn't any that you could see. It was the pen. The cheap hospital pen with the rubber grip that always squeaks when you twist it. The nurse had left it on the clipboard, and it was still warm, like somebody had just set it down and walked away. My name is Maya Trent. I was 29 that winter, living in Boston, trying to pretend I wasn't one late paycheck away from becoming a different person. The kind of person who sleeps with her coat on. The kind of person who knows which friends will stop answering if you just need to crash for a night. That night, I was sitting on an exam bed in the emergency department at Massachusetts General, paper gown open in the back, my jeans piled on a chair like someone else's life. My phone was face down beside me. My right wrist had a purple ring blooming around it like a bruise that couldn't decide what shade of truth it wanted to be. And on the intake form, under visitor restrictions, in block letters that looked like they belonged on a warning label, someone had written, "Do not let HIM in." It wasn't printed, it wasn't a checkbox, it wasn't a policy notice. It was a sentence. I didn't remember saying it. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't even remember thinking it, until I read it, and my stomach dropped like it recognized the handwriting before my brain did. Then from somewhere down the hall, I heard my husband's voice. Not yelling, not screaming, just that tone he used when he wanted to sound calm for other people, the tone that always meant he was already angry. "Sir," a security officer said, softer than you'd expect, "you can't go back there." Evan's laugh, small, controlled, drifted through the curtain walls. "I'm her husband. She's probably scared. She's probably confused. Let me talk to her." And right then, as if the hospital itself had started to breathe differently, the nurse stepped into my bay with a new clipboard and didn't look at my face. She looked at the form. Her eyes flicked over the words. Her mouth tightened. She slid the curtain shut like it was a lock. "If you're still here," she said, voice low, "I need you to answer me very clearly." She didn't ask if I was in pain. She didn't ask if I felt safe at home. She didn't do the gentle voice they teach them. She asked, "Did you write that?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Because somewhere deep in me, a part I didn't like to admit existed, a part that watched my own life like a person in the dark at the back of a movie theater, whispered, "You did, or you meant to." And another part, the part that had spent 2 years making excuses for a man I loved, whispered back, "No, someone else did. Someone is making a mistake." The nurse waited, pen hovering, like my answer would decide how the rest of the night would unfold. That's when my phone vibrated once, short, sharp, and I flipped it over. No new text. Just a voicemail notification from my own number. And the preview line read, "Do not let him in. Hold your theory, because the next detail punishes assumptions." I'm going to tell you what happened in Boston in the winter of 2022. I'm going to tell you how a marriage can feel like a warm apartment until you realize the heat is coming from a fire in the walls. I'm going to tell you about paperwork and timestamps and how fear can hide inside ordinary sentences. And I'm going to tell you why, even now, when the world is quiet and my phone buzzes in the dark, my body still braces, because part of me still believes that the hospital wasn't warning them about Evan. It was warning them about what I was about to become. 02:17 a.m. 2 hours earlier, I'd been in my kitchen in East Boston staring at a stack of unopened envelopes like they were small white threats. Rent, credit card, a final notice from a lab I didn't recognize, probably from some routine blood work I'd never asked for but still somehow owed money on. The bright red ink wasn't angry exactly. It was just indifferent, like the world saying, "Pay up or fall." Evan had been at the table, laptop open, pretending to read an email while he listened to me breathe. We'd been married for 14 months, not long enough to be old married, not short enough to still be newlywed. Long enough that people stopped congratulating you and started asking when you were going to have kids, like they were checking a box on your life plan. We didn't have kids, we barely had savings. I worked at a small marketing firm downtown, the kind that called itself a creative studio and paid you an exposure to culture. Evan worked construction, union jobs when the season was good, side work when it was. That winter had been brutal, not just in temperature but in opportunities. Snow days meant delays. Delays meant layoffs. Layoffs meant the kind of stress that makes you start counting grocery items in your head before you put them in the cart. We were the kind of middle class that looks stable from the outside and feels like a tightrope from the inside. That night I'd made spaghetti because it was cheap and familiar. Evan had asked if we could talk. I'd said, "About what?" like I didn't already know. There had been things, not the kind of things you tell your friends over brunch. The kind of things you tell yourself don't count because nobody got hurt that badly. The kind of things you bury under jokes and apologies and the hope that next week will be different. He said he'd gotten a call from his mother. He said she was worried because my mother had been asking around. He said we needed to be careful about family reputation. He said it like my family was the one that could collapse us. I asked him why his mother was involved at all. His jaw tightened. Because people talk, Maya. People talk. In a city as big as Boston, it's still a small world when you're scraping by. Your landlord knows your boss's cousin. Your neighbor's kid goes to school with your coworker's niece. Everybody sees everything in fragments. And I'd been showing fragments lately. Exhaustion under my eyes. A hesitation when my phone rang. The way I flinched when Evan came up behind me too quietly. I told myself it was because I was tired. Because money stress makes your nerves raw. Because winter makes everyone jumpy. Evan leaned back, folding his hands like he was trying to be reasonable. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Are you talking to anyone about us?" I stared at him. "What do you mean?" His eyes went to my phone on the counter. "You've been distant." That word, distant, like I was the one pulling away from a healthy thing. "I'm here," I said. He smiled like it hurt. "You're physically here, but your mind's somewhere else." If you've ever replayed a conversation at 3 a.m., hunting for the exact moment it turned, you know this feeling. Because in real time, nothing seemed explosive. It was just the slow tightening of the air. I told him I'd been seeing a therapist, finally, through my work's insurance, which barely covered it. One session every 2 weeks, copay I hated paying. I told him it was for my anxiety, for my insomnia, for the way my brain latched onto worst-case scenarios and wouldn't let go. I didn't tell him what I'd been afraid to say out loud. That my anxiety wasn't a chemical glitch. It was a warning system that had been trying to get my attention. Evan's face changed. Not anger, not exactly, something colder. "A therapist," he said, "so you're telling a stranger our business." "It's not," I started. He held up a hand. "No, I get it. You need someone to tell you you're right, someone to make me the bad guy." I felt my throat tighten. "That's not what therapy is." He laughed under his breath. "Sure, it's just you paying someone to confirm your feelings." That's when he asked again, "Are you talking to anyone else?" And I should have understood why he cared so much. I should have recognized the way his attention wasn't on my well-being, but on control of the story. But love is a lens, it distorts. I said no. I said I'm not having an affair. Because that was the other thing always hovering. The accusation, the implication, like if he could make me guilty of something, he could justify whatever he did next. He got up from the table, came around, kissed my forehead. Soft, public, perfect. "Okay," he said, "then we're fine." But his hand stayed on the back of my neck, a little too long, thumb pressing like a reminder. 2 hours later, I would be in a hospital gown staring at the words, "Do not let HIM in," and wondering who had finally said out loud, what I'd been too ashamed to admit. 12:41 a.m., the accident, if you want to call it that, happened in our hallway. We live on the second floor of an old triple-decker, the kind with narrow stairs, a railing that wobbles, and a front door that doesn't quite seal, so the wind whistles in like it's looking for somewhere to hide. I remember walking toward the bathroom because my chest felt tight, like I needed cold water on my face. I remember the floor being cold through my socks. I remember Evan behind me asking, "Where are you going?" I said, "Bathroom." He said, "We're not done talking." I stopped at the top of the stairs because the hallway is where voices echo and neighbors can hear. It was automatic, a survival instinct. Evan stepped closer. "Why are you acting like I'm a threat?" I looked at him. He was taller than me by half a foot, broader, built from lifting and hauling. When he wanted to look harmless, he could. Big guys learn that trick. They soften their eyes, lower their voice, act like you're the dramatic one. I said, "I'm not." He nodded like he was listening. "Then don't treat me like it." He reached for my phone, not snatching it, just holding out his hand like it was a normal request. "Let me see." My stomach twisted. "Why?" "Because you're hiding something." I was not like that, but the thought of him scrolling through my messages made my skin feel wrong. Therapy notes, texts with my sister about money, Google searches like signs of emotional abuse that I'd typed and deleted like they were contraband. I said no. His smile vanished. "What do you mean no?" "I mean no." And then it was fast. Not a punch, not a slap, something worse because it could be dismissed as a mistake. He stepped in. He put his hand on my wrist. He squeezed hard enough that pain shot up my arm. "Stop," I said, too quiet. He said, "Give me the phone." I pulled back. My sock slid on the cold wood. My heel caught the edge of the top step. I remember the sensation of falling before I remember hitting anything. Like your body knows first, and your mind lags behind. My shoulder slammed into the wall. My hip hit the stair. My wrist twisted under his grip. His hand didn't let go until the moment my body jerked away from his reach. And then I was on the landing, breath knocked out of me, staring up at him. Evan's face looked shocked. Not guilty, not scared. Shocked like my pain was an inconvenient surprise. "Maya," he said, like he'd caught me doing something to myself. I tried to breathe. It hurt. My lungs felt bruised. My wrist throbbed. He took one step down, hands raised, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "I didn't," he started. The sentence never finished. It didn't need to. We both knew what he wanted it to mean. I pushed myself up, shaking. "Don't touch me." He froze. "I'm trying to help you." I stared at him. "You hurt me." His eyes narrowed. "I didn't hurt you, you slipped." There it was, the first rewrite. Mysterious, the relationship lie, wasn't a single lie. It was a shifting thing, like a shadow moving depending on where the light was. He came down another step. "We should go to the hospital." I laughed once sharp. "So you can tell them I fell." His jaw clenched. "So you can make this a whole thing." I held my wrist to my chest. The pain made my eyes water. "It is a whole thing." He looked at the neighbors' doors like he could feel them listening. Then he looked back at me and his voice dropped. "Okay," he said. "If you want to tell people I'm abusive, you go ahead. But remember, people don't just hear your story. They hear mine too." That was the moment I understood my marriage wasn't just about love. It was about narrative control, about who gets believed. I crawled up the stairs to our apartment, grabbed my coat, my purse, my keys. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped my key fob twice. Evan stood in the doorway, watching like a bouncer. "Let me drive," he said. "No." "You're hurt." I said no. He sighed like I was exhausting. "Fine, then I'm coming with you." "No." His eyes flashed. "You can't stop me." That sentence, So casual, so certain, was the second cold open loop. Mystery C, the unresolved end question, was already forming. If someone believes they can't be stopped, what happens when you finally try? I walked out anyway, down the stairs, into the winter air that slapped my face awake. Snow was falling in thin flakes, the kind that looks pretty until it turns the sidewalks into traps. My car was parked half a block away. As I hurried toward it, I heard Evan behind me, footsteps crunching on slush. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from him, even though he was right there. Transcript, don't make me look like the bad guy. I didn't respond. I didn't look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started it with shaking fingers. Evan stood on the sidewalk in the falling snow, watching me like he was studying how far I could go. Then he did something that made my stomach go cold. He smiled, and he walked away in the opposite direction, toward the T station, like he didn't care if I went to the hospital at all. Like he knew I would come back. 01:12 a.m. The drive to Mass General should have taken 15 minutes. It took 30 because the roads were slick, and because I kept checking my mirrors like I expected Evan's truck to appear behind me, headlights filling my car like a threat. My wrist hurt so much my fingers tingled. My shoulder burned. Every bump in the road made my hips scream. When I pulled into the emergency entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a sigh that sounded like relief. Warm air hit my face, smelling like disinfectant and coffee. The waiting room was half full. Winter always fills hospitals, flu, falls, asthma, people who can't breathe in the cold. A TV played muted news. A toddler cried. Someone coughed wetly into a sleeve. I approached the front desk. The woman behind the glass wore a surgical mask and tired eyes. She asked for my name and date of birth. Maya Trent, I said. September 9, 1992. She typed, clicked, printed a wristband. Insurance. I handed over my card with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. She scanned it like it was a barcode on a product. Reason for visit. I hesitated. The truth felt heavy. I fell, I said finally, because that's what people do. They soften the truth so it will be accepted. She looked up, eyes quick on my face, down to my wrist, back up. She didn't ask how. She just said, take a seat. We'll call you. I sat in a plastic chair, hugging my coat around me. My phone buzzed again. A missed call, Evan. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. I didn't listen. I couldn't, not yet. A triage nurse called my name. She led me through double doors into a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and sweat, and something metallic I couldn't place. She asked me questions in a small room, allergies, medications, pain level. She took my blood pressure. It was high. She looked at me like she wanted to ask something else. Did you fall downstairs? She asked. Yes, I said. Were you alone? I hesitated. My husband was home. Her pen paused. Okay. She asked, do you feel safe at home? That question is supposed to be routine. A script, but the way she said it, careful, like she was offering me a lifeline, made my throat tighten. I stared at the floor. I thought about rent, about the wedding photos on our wall, about the way Evan could be sweet in front of people, the way his mother would call me dramatic, the way my own mother would say, marriage is hard, Maya, like hard meant bruises and fear. I thought about what would happen if I said no, what the hospital would do, what Evan would do. I said, I think so. The nurse's eyes didn't change. She just nodded slowly and moved on. Then she asked, do you want any visitor restrictions? I blinked. What? Some patients, she said, don't want certain people back in the treatment area. We can note that. My mouth went dry. Evan wasn't even here. Was he? I'd seen him walk away, but my body didn't believe in distance. My body believed he could appear anywhere. I started. The nurse held my gaze. "It's okay," she said. "You can tell me." In that moment, I felt something split inside me. The part that wanted to protect the image of my marriage, and the part that wanted to protect my skin. I whispered, "My husband, I don't want him back there." The nurse nodded, pen moving. "Name." "Evan," I said. "Evan Trent." She wrote something. I didn't see what. She didn't show me. She just put the clipboard down and said, "Thank you." That's the moment I thought the phrase began. But later, when I would fight for records, when I would read timestamps like they were scripture, I would realize something that made my stomach flip. The phrase had already been there before I spoke. Mystery B, the evidence contradiction, didn't begin with a missing camera or a scrambled clock. It began with paperwork predicting my fear. 01:38 a.m. They put me in a curtained bay. They took x-rays. They gave me ice packs. A physician assistant, unnamed in my memory because faces blur when you're in pain, told me my wrist was sprained but not broken. My shoulder was bruised. My hip was bruised. "Nothing serious," she said, like seriousness is only about bones and blood. "You can go home," she said. "Rest, follow up with your primary care." Go home, to the place where the air had tightened around my throat, to the hallway where my body had hit the wall and Evan had said, "You slipped." My phone buzzed again, another voicemail, another missed call. I finally listened, thumb trembling as I held the phone to my ear. Transcript, "Hey," Evan's voice said, soft. "I'm worried, call me back, we should talk. I don't want you telling people things you'll regret." Then a pause, a sound like he'd covered the receiver. And in the background, faint but clear, another voice, male maybe, said something that made my skin go cold. "Do not let him in." The voicemail ended. I stared at my phone. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. Evan hadn't said the phrase, someone else had, in his background, like it was being repeated somewhere he was. I stood up too fast, dizzy, and went to the curtain. I pushed it aside a little, peering down the hallway. That's when I saw him. Evan in his work jacket, hair damp with melting snow, walking briskly past the nurse's station. He wasn't looking for a room number. He wasn't lost. He was heading straight toward me like he'd been there before. I yanked the curtain shut, heart hammering. My hands shook so hard the curtain rings rattled. A nurse appeared immediately. "Ma'am." "He's here," I whispered. Her eyes went to the intake form clipped outside my curtain. She read it. Her face hardened with recognition. And that's when she slid the curtain closed like it was a door, like it was a barrier, and asked me the question I couldn't answer. "Did you write that?" 02:20 a.m. After that moment, the night becomes a series of fragments, stitched together later by documents and timestamps, and the things my body remembered even when my mind tried to forget. The nurse, unnamed, because I never learned her name and hospitals are full of ghosts in scrubs, stepped out and spoke to security. I heard voices. Evan's calm anger. The security officers practiced firmness. There was no shouting, no dramatic struggle, just the soft pressure of policy, the invisible force of "you can't be here." And for a second, I felt relief so sharp it hurt. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Evan. Transcript, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't respond, I couldn't. My wristband itched. The paper gown rustled when I breathed. I stared at the intake form like it was an oracle. The nurse came back, eyes steady. "He says you're confused," she said. "He says you had a panic attack and ran out. He says you're not thinking clearly." Of course he did. She asked, "Do you want to speak to an officer?" My stomach dropped. Police meant reports. Reports meant records. Records meant consequences. Consequences meant everything. I thought about Evan's mother, about my mother, about the rent, about how leaving isn't just emotional, it's logistical, it's money, it's insurance, it's shame. "I don't know," I whispered. The nurse nodded like she'd heard that 1,000 times. "Okay," she said, "but I'm going to document what you told me, and I'm going to keep him out." She left again. I sat on the bed and finally looked closely at the intake form, at the handwriting. Under visitor restrictions, it didn't just say do not let HIM in. It said do not let HIM in. Patient REQUSTED 12/18/22/01/05. But I hadn't arrived until after 1:10. I knew because I'd checked the dashboard clock in my car when I parked. I knew because my phone had shown 1:12 when I walked through the automatic doors. 01:05 was before I got there. Before I could have requested anything. Before I could have even known Evan would show up. The air felt thinner, my palms went cold. This detail seemed small, remember it. I asked the nurse when she returned, "What time did I check in?" She glanced at the computer. "Looks like 1:12, she said. I swallowed. "Then why does the form say 1:05? She frowned. "Sometimes the system stamps when the chart is opened," she said, like she was explaining a glitch. "Not when the patient physically arrives." Maybe, but something in her voice told me she didn't believe that explanation fully either. I asked who opened my chart. She hesitated. "It would have been registration," she said, "or someone." Someone, a word that can hold a whole universe of fear. When you're hurt and scared, you want the world to be clean. You want the timeline to make sense. You want paperwork to be boring. But that's not what happened. That winter, my paperwork wasn't boring. It was a warning. 02:47 a.m. They discharged me at 2:47. They gave me a wrist brace. They handed me a printout with aftercare instructions and a list of symptoms that would mean return to the emergency department. The language was sterile. The kind that assumes your danger comes from your body, not your home. Outside, the city was quiet, snow softening everything. The streetlights made the flakes look like ash. My car was cold. I turned on the heat and sat for a minute breathing, trying to decide what to do. Go home. Go to my sister. I hadn't told my sister anything real. I'd been too ashamed. Shame makes you isolate. It makes you protect the person hurting you because you think it says something about you if you admit it. My phone buzzed. Another call from Evan. I didn't answer. I pulled out of the hospital parking area and drove aimlessly for a few minutes, just moving because motion felt safer than stillness. Then my phone buzzed again. A text not from Evan. From an unknown number. Transcript: "You did the right thing, do not let him in." My throat closed, I nearly swerved. Unknown number, no area code I recognized. I pulled into a side street and parked, hazard lights blinking. I stared at the message until my eyes blurred. This was Evan. He didn't text like that. He didn't use "you did the right thing." He texted like a man accusing you of betrayal. So who was this? And how did they know? Mystery C tightened like a noose. Who else was watching? I checked my call log. No missed calls from unknown numbers. No clue. My phone vibrated again. Another voicemail notification from my own number, again. My skin prickled. I opened it. The voicemail file was only 4 seconds long. Transcript: a breath, a faint rustle, then a whisper, not quite a whisper, more like someone speaking close to a microphone. "Do not let him in." The voice didn't sound like Evan. It sounded like me. I sat in my car with my heart pounding, and for the first time that night, the fear shifted. Because if it was my voice, then either someone was imitating me, or I had said it and I didn't remember. Which is worse, being lied to or being used? 03:19 a.m. I drove to my office parking garage because it felt like neutral ground. The building was locked, but the garage gate opened with my badge. Inside, the concrete levels smelled like damp and car exhaust. It was empty. My footsteps echoed when I walked to the stairwell. I sat on the lowest step, wrist aching, and finally let myself cry silently, face in my coat sleeve because I didn't want to be loud. Because even alone, I was trained to keep my distress quiet. My phone buzzed, a bank alert. Case note, card purchase, $63.48, CVS Pharmacy, Boston, MA 03:17 a.m. 03:17. I stared at it like it was a punchline. I hadn't bought anything. I was sitting in a parking garage. My card was in my wallet. Then another alert. Case note, card purchase, $41.22, Shell, Boston, MA 03:18 a.m. My breath caught. Someone had my card. No, impossible, unless Evan had my card number saved, unless he'd taken a photo, unless he'd used Apple Pay that was linked to my account. He'd set up our phones together when we moved in. He'd insisted on sharing everything. He'd called it intimacy. I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. The transactions were pending. Location tags showed addresses in South Boston, 2 miles away. My stomach flipped. Evan had a habit when he wanted to punish me. He'd spend money. Not on himself exactly, on necessities, on stuff we needed, like he was proving I couldn't control anything. Like he was proving, you're not in charge here. I called the bank's fraud line. An automated voice told me the wait time was approximately 37 minutes. I laughed, humorless. 37 minutes to stop someone from draining you while you sit in a parking garage bleeding fear into your coat. I texted Evan, hands shaking. Transcript, stop using my card. He responded almost immediately. Transcript, what are you talking about? A lie that fast is almost impressive. I sent a screenshot of the bank alert. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, transcript. I'm getting you ice and pain meds because you're my wife, but sure, make me the villain. I stared at the screen. Ice and pain meds, CVS, Shell gas station. A normal explanation, a caring husband narrative. But the timing, 03:17, matched too perfectly with that 4-second voicemail from my own number. A phrase, a purchase, a minute. My skin crawled. If you have a theory, keep it quiet for now. 03:41 a.m., I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not yet. I drove to a 24-hour diner in Somerville because it was bright and public and full of people who didn't know me. A place where the air smelled like pancakes and old coffee. I sat in a booth near the window, back to the wall, and kept my phone on the table like a weapon. The waitress, unnamed, middle-aged, tired, asked what I wanted. I ordered tea because my stomach couldn't handle food. While I waited, I opened my voicemail app and checked the from my own number messages. There were 3 now. The first had been earlier, the one with Evan's voice and that background phrase. The second had been the whisper. The third was new, timestamped 03:33 a.m. I pressed play. Transcript, Maya, Evan's voice said, "Answer your phone, I'm outside." My body went cold. Outside what? The diner, my office, our apartment. He didn't say. Then a pause, a click like he'd hit mute. And a woman's voice, soft, clinical, said, "Do not let him in." This time it wasn't my voice. It sounded like a nurse. The voicemail ended. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. If this was real, if this wasn't some glitch, then someone in a hospital had said the phrase, and it was now inside my phone like a parasite. I looked up at the diner window. Snow falling, headlights passing, no obvious figure on the sidewalk, but Boston is full of people at night, delivery drivers, insomniacs, people running from something. I went to the restroom and locked myself in a stall, breathing hard, trying to think like a rational person. Rational options: call my sister, call the police, go to a hotel, change locks, freeze accounts, block Evan. But rationality isn't just logic, it's resources, It's safety nets. It's believing you deserve help. I called my sister anyway. She didn't answer. It was almost 4 a.m. She was asleep. I didn't leave a voicemail. Shame stopped my finger. I texted instead. Transcript, can I come over tomorrow? I'm not okay. Then I stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror. My hair was tangled. My eyes were red. My wrist brace looked like a cast of my own denial. I went back to the booth. My tea was cold. The waitress refilled it without asking. My phone buzzed. A message from my therapist's online portal. Not a session reminder, not billing. A new document uploaded. Session note 12/15/22. 3 days ago, I hadn't seen it before. My therapist didn't usually upload notes, not like that. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Case note, client reports fear of partner's escalation. Client states, if I end up in a hospital, do not let him in. Client requests safety planning. I stared at the words until my vision tunneled. I didn't remember saying that. But the portal wasn't lying. The note had a timestamp. It had my therapist's initials. It had my copay payment logged. This detail seems small, remember it. Because if I had said it 3 days earlier, then the hospital intake form wasn't predicting my fear. It was echoing it, which meant someone somewhere had access to my therapy note, or the same phrase had been said in 2 different places for reasons that were about to collide. 04:22 a.m. I left the diner and drove to a cheap hotel near Logan, one of those chains that smell like carpet cleaner and old air conditioning. I chose it because it was close to the airport, close to movement, close to escape. At the front desk, I paid with my debit card because I didn't trust my credit account anymore. The clerk, unnamed, young, asked for ID and slid me a key card. "Just you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He looked at my wrist brace and didn't ask questions. People in hotels learn not to. I went to the room, locked the deadbolt, flipped the latch. I shoved a chair under the handle because paranoia is just fear with furniture. Then I sat on the bed and listened to the building. Distant footsteps, an elevator ding, a muffled TV. My phone buzzed, a location-sharing notification. Evan had started sharing his location with me. Evan is sharing his location indefinitely. I hadn't asked. He turned it on. He'd done it before like a gift. I clicked it, heart pounding. His dot was moving, in South Boston, near the CVS, then pausing, then moving again. And then at 04:19 a.m., his dot jumped. Not moved, jumped. From South Boston to East Boston, near our apartment in 1 second. That's not how location works, not unless. Not unless the phone's signal was bouncing. Not unless someone was spoofing. Not unless the device was turned off and on again and the app was guessing. I stared at the screen, my skin prickled. Evidence contradiction. Mystery B, a dot that couldn't decide where my husband was. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because sometimes fear makes you reckless. Hello, my voice sounded thin. Silence, then a click like someone had switched a line. Then my own voice, recorded, played back at me. Do not let him in. The line went dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone that wasn't there because cell phones don't have dial tones. My throat closed, my eyes burned. Someone you know has lived this exact night. Not because it's dramatic, because it's ordinary in the worst way, because control can wear a familiar face and institutions can echo your own words back at you like a curse. 04:58 a.m. At 4:58, there was a knock on my hotel door. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 soft taps. My whole body froze. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The taps came again, 3 more, patient. A voice spoke through the door, male, calm. Maya, it's me. Evan. My stomach dropped, my skin went cold. How did he find me? I hadn't told anyone, my sister didn't answer, I hadn't used a credit card, my phone location was off. Unless he'd seen the bank alerts, unless he'd tracked my car, unless he'd guessed, unless he'd followed me from the hospital, unless he'd installed something on my phone. I thought about the chair under the handle, the deadbolt, the latch barriers. Maya, Evan said again, voice soft. Open the door, you're scaring me. Scaring him, of course. My fear was always framed as harm to him. I didn't respond. There was a pause, then quieter, like he was leaning closer. I know you're in there. My throat tightened. My wrist throbbed. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my ribs. Then from the hallway beyond him, another voice, female, older, said something I couldn't make out. And Evan answered, no, she's not thinking, it's fine. He wasn't alone. My mind raced. Hotel policy. If a guest is causing disturbance, staff can intervene. If he convinces them I'm unstable, they could open the door. He could get in. I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk. The clerk answered, sleepy, front desk. There's someone at my door, I whispered. My husband, I don't want him here. A pause, then, ma'am, if he's your husband. He's not allowed, I said, please. Another pause, then like he was reading from a script, do you want us to call the police? My stomach twisted, police again, reports again, shame again. I just want him gone, I whispered. The clerk said, okay, stay in your room, we'll send someone. I hung up and stared at the door. Evan knocked again, 3 taps. Then he said, Maya, don't make me do this. There it was, that phrase again, not the anchor phrase, but the sentiment, the certainty that my choices were decorations, not barriers. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Transcript, do not let him in. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Then the front desk called back. Ma'am, the clerk said, voice tight, there's no one in the hallway. My blood went cold. What? I just checked, he said, no one. I swallowed hard. I heard him. I'm standing right here, he said, it's empty. I stared at the door, the chair was still braced, the latch was still down, the deadbolt was still set. No shadow under the door, no footsteps, nothing. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification from my own number. I didn't listen, I couldn't. This is where the uncanny hint creeps in, not a ghost, not a monster, just something that doesn't line up. A voice you hear, a hallway someone else says is empty. Evidence you can't trust because your own senses are part of the evidence, and your mind is the one thing you're not sure you can rely on. I lay on the bed in my coat, shoes still on, and waited for morning like it was a rescue team. 08:12 a.m. the next day my sister called me back. Her voice was thick with sleep and worry. Maya, what's going on? I told her the version I could bear. I fell, Evan and I fought, I needed space. She said, come here, no questions, no judgment, just a door. I packed my bag, checked out, and drove to her apartment in Quincy. She hugged me like she'd been holding her breath for months. She looked at my wrist and didn't ask how it happened. She just said, you're safe here. Safe, a word that felt foreign. I slept for 3 hours straight, body collapsing like it had been holding itself up on adrenaline. When I woke up, my phone had 17 missed calls from Evan and 4 from unknown numbers. There was one email from my landlord. Case note subject, emergency access request. Hi Maya, your husband came by this morning asking for a spare key. Per building policy, we cannot provide keys without both tenants present or written authorization. Please advise. Management. He had gone to the landlord. He had tried to get access. He had used the fact that we were married like a master key. I forwarded the email to myself, like evidence I could hold. Then I listened to the voicemails, one by one, because sometimes you can't avoid the thing that's chasing you. Sometimes you have to turn and look. Evan's messages were predictable. Worry, anger, blame, apology, threat disguised as concern. Transcript, Maya, please, I love you. Transcript, you're humiliating me. Transcript, I'm coming to get you. Then the unknown ones. One was silence, then the phrase, do not let him in. Another was a recording of hospital background noise, monitor beeps, muffled voices, and then a woman saying, visitor restrictions, okay. Then, do not let him in. I felt sick. My sister watched me, face pale. Maya, she said softly, this is not normal. I laughed once, no. She said, we should call the police. I said, and tell them what? That my husband is calling me, that I'm getting weird voicemails. She swallowed, that he hurt you. The room felt smaller. I said he didn't. The lie came out automatically, even after everything. Shame isn't logical, it's trained. My sister didn't argue, she just said, okay. Then we start with the hospital records, we start with facts. Facts, evidence, paperwork. That's how the investigation began, not with a detective, not with yellow tape, with a woman in a winter coat and a sister who refused to let her hide. Day 2, 10:38 a.m. I called Mass General's Medical Records Department. The woman on the phone was polite and firm. She told me I could request my chart through the patient portal. She told me it could take up to 30 days. 30 days, like trauma waits for bureaucracy. I asked specifically for the intake form, the one with the phrase. She said, we can't release certain internal notes immediately. I asked why. She said, for patient safety. I almost laughed. Patient safety was the thing I was begging for, and it was the thing they could withhold under the same banner. I requested everything anyway. Records, timestamps, security logs, any incident report about Evan being removed. Then I called the hotel and asked if they had security footage from the hallway at 4:58 a.m. The manager, unnamed, weary, told me their cameras didn't record the interior hallways for guest privacy, only the lobby and entrances. Then can you confirm if anyone was in the hallway at that time? I asked. He said, ma'am, I can't provide that information. I pressed, he sighed. We did have a complaint call from your room. We logged it. Our staff checked the hall. They noted no disturbance observed. That's all I can say. No disturbance observed. Like I had imagined my husband's voice. Like my fear was a hallucination with paperwork. I hung up shaking. My sister made me eat toast. She made me drink water. She made me sit with her while she Googled Restraining Order Massachusetts and how to freeze credit. We didn't file anything yet. Not because we shouldn't have, but because my brain was still stuck in the loop of, if I do this, it becomes real. Evan texted nonstop. Transcript, I talked to your landlord. I'm just trying to take care of you. Transcript, you're with your sister, aren't you? Tell her to stop poisoning you. Transcript, we need to fix this before people find out. Family pressure, reputation, control. Then at 2:06 p.m., a text from an unknown number again. Transcript, he has done this before. My fingers went numb. I typed, who is this? No response. If you're still here, you already feel what this is turning into. Because the next step in any story like this is the part where you learn you aren't special. Your fear isn't unique. Your husband's behavior isn't a one-off. It's a pattern. And patterns leave trails. Day 3:08:51 a.m. I went back to East Boston with my sister. We didn't go inside. We just sat in the car across the street, watching our building like it was a crime scene. Snow was piled along the curb, gray with road salt. A man shoveled a neighbor's steps. Life went on like nothing had happened. Evan's truck wasn't there. That didn't mean he wasn't inside. He had friends with vans, coworkers, men who could lend him a ride. The world is full of ways for a man to move if he wants to. My sister said, "Do you want to get your stuff?" I stared at the building. "I don't know." She nodded. "We can call for a police escort." The idea made my stomach twist. Police meant public, public meant shame, shame meant staying. I said, "Let's just wait." We waited an hour. At 09:47 the front door opened and Evan stepped out. He was wearing the same work jacket as the hospital night. His face looked normal, tired maybe, a man going to work. He walked to his truck, so it had been there, just parked around the corner, and opened the driver's door. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He looked directly at my car. Not at traffic, not scanning the street. At my car. Like he'd known where we were the whole time. He smiled, small, controlled. Then he raised his phone and held it up, like he was taking a picture. My sister whispered, "Oh my God." My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Transcript, "You can't hide." My sister started the car and pulled away fast, heart pounding in my ears. Evan didn't follow. He just watched us leave like he was confirming something. That's when I realized the fight wasn't just about my body. It was about surveillance, about his certainty that he could reach me. We drove to the nearest police station anyway, because my sister's courage was louder than my shame. At the desk, an officer took my statement. He asked what happened. He asked if Evan had threatened me. He asked if he'd hit me. I told the story with the softest words possible, like I was trying to keep Evan's reputation intact even as I asked for help. The officer looked at my wrist brace. He looked at my face. Then he said, "Ma'am, do you want an emergency restraining order?" I swallowed, "I don't know." He nodded, like he'd heard that 1,000 times too. He said, "I'm going to run his name." He typed into his computer. His eyes flicked across the screen, then up at me. Something in his expression changed. "Trent," he said slowly, "Evan Trent." "Yes." He clicked again. Then he stood up and walked to a back room like he needed privacy. My stomach dropped. When he came back, his tone was different, more careful. "Ma'am," he said, "we have prior incidents associated with this individual." My throat tightened. "What kind?" He hesitated. "Domestic-related, out of state." Out of state. The phrase made my mind race. Evan had lived in Ohio before Boston. He told me stories about bad roommates and crazy exes. He said he left because he wanted a fresh start. He'd never said he left because he had a record. The officer said, "Some records are sealed, but yes, there's history." My skin went cold. Betrayal vector, hidden violence history, not a rumor, not a feeling, a record. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The officer said, "I can connect you with an advocate." An advocate came, unnamed, kind, and explained options. Emergency protective order, shelter resources, safety planning. She used calm words like pattern and escalation. She didn't say monster. She didn't have to. I signed the paperwork for an emergency order with shaking hands. It felt like betrayal, even though I was the one betrayed. Then the officer said something else that made my stomach drop. "By the way," he said, "there was a call from Mass General that night. Security asked if we wanted to respond. It was logged as domestic disturbance, visitor removal." I stared at him. "There's a police log from the hospital." "Yes." "Can I see it?" He said, "We can request it." And that's when the investigation moved from my feelings into a timeline, because police logs have times. They have codes. They have the kind of language that turns your life into a case number. Case note, police CAD excerpt later obtained. 12/18/2202/16, hospital security requests PD. Male party attempting access to patient. Patient requests no contact. Male escorted out. no further. 02:16. Right after I'd read the intake form, right after Evan's voice in the hallway. The record existed. The world had seen a piece of it. And yet the most terrifying part wasn't that Evan had history. It was that the phrase "do not let him in" had been written at 01:05 before any of this started. Minute turn, day 5. At about 45 minutes into telling you this is the part where your brain tries to make it simple. You want a clean villain. You want Evan to be the whole story. But the betrayal reframed itself. Because when the hospital finally released my records, expedited after the police request, the intake form did not look the way I remembered. It was the same form, same handwriting, same phrase. But under it, in smaller writing, there was a note I didn't see that night. Case note, flag, prior incident. Do not allow visitor Evan Trent. See 2020 security memo. 2020. 2 years before I married him. 2 years before I even met him. The air left my lungs. I read it again. 2020 security memo, prior incident, visitor flagged. My first thought was, it must be a mistake, another Evan Trent, a mix-up. But Boston isn't that sloppy with identity in a hospital system. They use date of birth. They use MRNs, medical record numbers. They track you like a barcode. I requested the security memo. The hospital initially refused, citing internal policy. The advocate pushed. The police pushed. Eventually, I got a redacted version, black bars over names, but enough left to make my hands go numb. Case note, security incident memo 114-2020. Male identified as Evan Trent attempted to enter ED treatment area. Female patient requested no contact. Male became agitated. PD notified. Male trespassed. Female patient, 2020. I didn't know her name. It was redacted. It had to be. But she existed. She had sat in a hospital bed and asked for the same thing I asked for. Do not let him in. Evan's lie shifted again. It wasn't just "I didn't hurt you." It was "this has never happened before." It had. And the hospital knew. Which meant one of two things. Either my husband had been doing this long before I met him, or someone had been using his name as a mask. Hold that thought. Because the next major turn, around minute 85, would make me question even the idea of his name as truth. Day 6, 11:26 p.m. That night, Evan violated the emergency order. Not by showing up, not by calling. He did something smarter. He sent me an email from a new address. No name, just letters and numbers. The subject line, "Do not let him in." My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. The email body was only one sentence. "You know I'm not the only one." My hands shook. My sister watched my face and said, "What?" I showed her. She went pale. "You need to tell the officer," she said. I did. The officer took it seriously. He asked for screenshots. He asked if I could forward the email headers. He said they could subpoena if needed. Subpoena, a word that makes it feel like a real case. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my sister's couch, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tight. My phone was on silent, but I kept checking it like a compulsion. Anxiety loops, shame, the urge to find a pattern that will save you. At 03:17 a.m., that time again, like a cruel joke, my phone buzzed anyway, because it was a bank push notification that bypassed silent mode. Case note, account login from new device 03:17 a.m. My blood went cold. Someone had logged into my bank again. I changed passwords. I turned on two-factor authentication. I froze my credit. I did everything the internet tells you to do. But you know what the internet doesn't tell you? That when you're being controlled by someone you love, security measures can feel like you're trying to lock your own life away from the person who thinks they own it. At 22. Another notification. Case note, location history. Device moved 03:21 a.m. East Boston, 0.2 miles. My phone claimed it had moved, but it was in my hand. I stared at it, heart racing. Location history can glitch. GPS can drift, but this wasn't drift. This was a dot jumping, a history rewriting itself. The evidence itself was unstable. Mystery be deepened. If the facts couldn't be trusted, what did that mean about my memory? Day 8:02:09 p.m. The advocate helped me file for a longer protective order. In Massachusetts, an emergency order is temporary. You have to go to court for a 209A order. You have to stand in a room and make your private fear public. The courthouse smelled like old paper and winter coats. People waited on benches, holding folders like shields. Some were crying. Some were numb. It felt like a secret society of people who had learned that love can turn into paperwork. When my case was called, I stood before a judge and told the story again. The judge asked if Evan had a history. The officer had provided information. The judge nodded, face neutral, and issued the order. Evan wasn't there, he didn't show. Which should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made me feel hunted. Because Evan liked to avoid situations where he couldn't control the narrative. Outside court, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Transcript, you think a paper stops him. I showed the officer, he frowned. He asked if I recognized the number. I didn't. He said they would look into it. That phrase, look into it, can feel like a blanket that doesn't cover your feet. We went to my apartment with a police escort to retrieve belongings. The officer stood outside the door while I packed. The apartment smelled like spaghetti and cologne and a faint sourness I couldn't place. Evan wasn't there, but he'd been there recently. There were fresh boot prints on the mat. The trash had been taken out. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. My winter coat was missing, not the one I wore, the nicer one, the one Evan had given me for Christmas the year before. My stomach twisted. Then I noticed something on the dresser, a manila envelope with my name written on it, in Evan's handwriting. Inside was a copy of my hospital discharge paperwork. And on the top page, someone had circled the line about returning to the ER if symptoms worsen. And in the margin, in neat block letters, they'd written, "Do not let HIM in." It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a joke. It was like he was repeating a phrase he had adopted, like he was using it as a brand. Or like someone else had written it, and he'd found it and decided to wield it. I felt my skin crawl. My sister whispered, "We need to leave." We left. Minute tilde 75 build, around the 75-minute mark of a 2-hour story. This is usually where the fear peaks. The big event, the moment that breaks you. For me, it wasn't a chase or a scream. It was a hospital call. Mass General called me on a blocked number. A woman, unnamed, said, "Ms. Trent, we need to speak with you about a discrepancy in your medical record." My stomach dropped. What discrepancy? She hesitated. There was an intake under your name on January 3rd. January 3rd, that was yesterday. I hadn't been to the hospital. I'd been in Quincy, under my sister's roof, afraid to even go to the grocery store. "I wasn't there," I said. The woman said, "We believe someone may have used your information. We need you to come in and verify identity." My hands went numb. What did they do? She said they presented with a minor injury, but the notable thing is, there was a visitor restriction noted. My throat closed. What did it say? She paused, then said quietly, like she didn't want to feed the phrase power. It said, "Do not let him in." My vision tunneled. The phrase wasn't just echoing across my life. Someone was using it under my name. Evidence, contradiction, identity. I asked, voice shaking, who was the visitor? The woman hesitated. It was listed as Evan Trent. My body went cold, my skin prickled, my heart hammered. I whispered, but I wasn't there. Silence on the line. Then the woman said, "Ms. Trent, we have CCTV from registration. We can review it with you." And that's when the impossible happened. Not supernatural, not fantasy. Just the kind of impossible that makes your knees weak because it means the world can imitate you. We went to the hospital with the officer and the advocate. They took us to a small office where a security supervisor, unnamed, pulled up footage on a monitor. The camera angle showed the registration desk. A woman in a winter hat approached. She wore a mask. Her hair was tucked in. She held her wrist like it hurt. She gave her name. The clerk typed. The woman's posture, her small movements, they looked like me. Then she turned slightly, and for a second the camera caught her eyes above the mask. They weren't my eyes. My stomach flipped. Relief and terror collided. "Is that you?" the supervisor asked gently. "No," I whispered, "but she looks like me." The supervisor nodded. "We think someone may have." The officer interrupted. "Can you zoom in?" They zoomed. The image pixelated, the woman's face blurred. And right then, the timestamp in the corner of the video jumped. It went from 01, 04 to 01, 05 to 01, 04 again. The supervisor frowned. "That's odd." He clicked the timeline. The footage glitched, skipping frames. The officer said, "Can you export this?" The supervisor said, "We can," but he hesitated. "Sometimes the system compresses." Compresses, like truth can be squeezed until it changes shape. Then the woman on the video handed over an insurance card. The clerk held it up to scan. It was my card. My actual insurance card. The one I'd carried for years. My hands went numb. My sister whispered, "How?" I swallowed hard. "It was in my purse," I said. "I never lost it." But there it was, on the screen, in someone else's hand. The supervisor paused the footage. "You're sure that's yours?" I nodded, throat tight. "I know the crack in the corner, I know the number." The officer's jaw tightened. "We need a copy of that footage," he said, "and we need to know who that person is." Then the supervisor said something that made my skin go cold. The visitor, the male who tried to enter, he signed in too. He clicked another camera angle, the entrance. A man walked in, winter jacket, hair damp with snow, moving like he belonged there. He looked up at the camera for a second. It was Evan. Or it looked like him. But his face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat. His features were just slightly off. The jawline too sharp, the eyes too flat, like someone wearing Evan's face badly. My body didn't know what to do with that. My marriage had taught me to fear Evan. Now footage suggested someone else could wear him like a costume. The officer murmured, "Could be a relative." I whispered, "Evan doesn't have a brother." Or so he'd told me. That was major turn too, the evidence flipping interpretation. Because up until then, the story was about Evan controlling me. Now, the evidence suggested something else. Either Evan had lied about his identity at the deepest level, or someone was impersonating both of us. And the phrase "do not let him in" wasn't just my warning. It was a code, a signature. Minute aftershock, after we left the hospital, my body started to shake uncontrollably, not from cold, from adrenaline and delayed fear. My muscles clenched. My jaw hurt from being tight. We sat in the car in the hospital garage. The officer made calls. The advocate spoke softly to me like I was on the edge of fainting. My sister held my good hand. I stared out the windshield at falling snow and thought, if someone can use my name and my insurance card, if someone can show up as me and flag my husband, then what parts of my life are actually mine? The officer asked me, Where is your insurance card right now? I pulled out my wallet. The card was there. My stomach flipped. It's here. He frowned. Then what we saw. A copy, a fake, a photograph, a printed duplicate. Identity theft. It happens. But the timing, the phrase, the hospital, this wasn't just a random scam. It was personal. The officer said, "Do you have any idea who would do this?" I thought about Evan's emails. You know I'm not the only one. I whispered. Evan said something. What? He said, I'm not the only one. The officer nodded slowly, like he was fitting pieces together. We need to locate him, he said. I laughed bitter. Good luck. At that moment my phone buzzed. A text from Evan's number. Transcript, stop dragging my name through dirt. My body went cold. Evan's number. But Evan was supposed to be avoiding contact. He was supposed to be the one under restriction. I showed the officer. He frowned. We can subpoena carrier records, he said. See if it's actually his device. Carrier records, logs, evidence again. Then my phone buzzed again. Voicemail from my own number. I pressed play without thinking. Transcript, Maya, a male voice said, not Evan. You don't get to rewrite this. Do not let him in. The voicemail ended. The voice wasn't a whisper. It was firm, angry, like a man who believed the phrase belonged to him. I felt my skin crawl. Which is worse, being lied to or realizing your lie is someone else's script? Minute tilde 110 investigation. Over the next week, the case became a pile of documents that didn't want to line up. The officer pulled phone records. Evan's number had been used from towers near South Boston on the night of the CVS purchase. But at the exact moment a voicemail from Evan's number was left on my phone, the tower ping came from East Boston. 2 places, 1 number. Case note, carrier log excerpt summarized. Device A0317 Tower, South Boston. Device A0333 Tower, East Boston. No travel time consistent. The officer said it could be call forwarding, spoofing, a cloned SIM, techniques I didn't understand, and we're not going to turn this into a how-to because that's not what this is. What matters is what it did to me. It made me distrust every vibration of my phone. Every ring became a question. Who is really calling? We pulled hotel records. The hotel provided a keycard log for my room because my sister insisted and the officer requested. Case note, hotel keycard log. Room 214, keycard used 04:57 a.m. 04:58 a.m. 05:02 a.m. My stomach dropped. The keycard had been used. I hadn't opened the door. The chair had been braced. The deadbolt was on. But the log said the keycard was used at 04:58, the exact time I heard Evan's knock. The front desk had said no one was there, but the keycard log didn't care what the front desk said. It cared about electronic truth. My skin prickled. How? I whispered. The manager explained. Sometimes keycards glitch. Sometimes staff cards register. Sometimes a door can be tested without opening fully. Did anyone access my room? I asked. He said, we have no record of entry. No record, but the keycard log was a record. Contradiction again. Then we pulled my landlord's fob access logs. The building used a keypad system. It logged entries. Case note, building access log. 12/19/22 a.m. Unit 2B, fob used Evan Trent. Evan had entered. He'd been in our apartment. That's when he left the discharge papers. He wasn't just calling. He was staging evidence. He was leaving traces like he wanted me to find them, like he wanted to turn my fear into a maze. My therapist, unnamed, sent me a message through the portal. Please prioritize safety. We can discuss dissociation and memory gaps, but your body is telling you something. Dissociation, memory gaps. the voicemail that sounded like my voice. I kept asking myself, did I say the phrase? Did I write it? Did I become the warning? Then 2 days later, the officer called and said they'd located Evan. He was in a hospital. Not Mass General, a smaller one across town. He had checked in under a different name. My stomach flipped. Different name meant my wedding certificate might be a contract with a stranger. The officer said, "We need you to come in." I went, wrist sweating, heart pounding. They brought Evan into an interview room. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who'd been sleeping in his truck. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were raw. He smiled when he saw me, like he still believed I belonged to him. "Maya," he said softly, "thank God, they told me you were making accusations." Accusations, like my bruises were a rumor. I stared at him. "Who are you?" I whispered. His smile faltered. "What?" I said, "What's your name?" He laughed shaky. Evan Trent." The officer slid a file across the table. "Your legal name is Evan Trent." Evan's jaw tightened. "Yeah." The officer opened the file. "Then why did you check into a hospital as Evan Blackwell?" Evan's face drained of color. My stomach dropped. Evan whispered, because I didn't want her to find me." "Her?" the officer asked. Evan's eyes flicked to me, then away. "My ex," he said, she's crazy." There it was, the old story, crazy ex, fresh start. I asked, voice shaking, "Did you hurt her?" Evan slammed his hand on the table, not hard, but enough to make me flinch. "No." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Trent Blackwell, whatever your name is, your record suggests otherwise." Evan's face twisted. "That record is a lie," he snapped. "She lied, she wanted money, she wanted to ruin me." The officer said, "And now your wife says she fell downstairs after you grabbed her wrist." Evan's eyes flashed. "She slipped." Same lie, same rewrite. My stomach turned. Betrayal, not just physical, narrative. Then the officer asked, "Do you know anything about someone impersonating your wife at Mass General?" Evan froze, his face went blank. "What?" The officer described the footage, the fake insurance card, the visitor restriction. Evan laughed short, disbelieving. "That's insane." He looked at me. "Maya, you hear this? This is what they're doing. They're making me the villain in some weird conspiracy." He leaned forward, voice soft. "Baby, come home." The officer stopped him. "You are under a protective order. Do not contact her." Evan sat back, eyes cold. "Fine," he said, "but if she's getting weird calls, that's not me." I stared at him, trying to read his face like a document. Was he lying? Was he telling the truth? Was there someone else? Then Evan said something that made my skin go cold. He said, "I told you, I'm not the only one." The same sentence from the email. My throat tightened. What does that mean? Evan smiled, slow. "It means you're not the first woman to think she can lock a door and be safe." I felt my body shake. The officer ended the interview. Outside in the hospital hallway, I leaned against a wall and tried to breathe. My chest hurt. My wrist ached. My stomach churned. My sister held my elbow. "Maya," she whispered, he's terrifying." I nodded, unable to speak. And then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Transcript, "He learned the phrase from you." I stared at it. My blood ran cold. He learned the phrase from you. Not from a nurse, not from a prior victim, from me. How could he learn it from me if I didn't remember saying it? Unless I had. Unless I'd said it in therapy, unless I'd said it in fear, unless he'd listened, unless he'd had access. Unless my words had leaked and he'd turned them into a weapon. Minute closing loops. By the time we got back to my sister's apartment, my brain felt like it had been scraped raw. The officer told me they would charge Evan for violating the order, for identity fraud if they could prove it, for prior incidents if they could reopen them. Legal language that sounded solid until you realize it's still just words against a man who knows how to move through cracks. I sat at my sister's kitchen table, staring at my wrist brace, feeling like a person made of paper. I opened my therapy portal again and read the session note from 3 days before the hospital incident. Case note, client states, if I end up in a hospital, do not let him in. Client reports partner monitors phone and finances. Monitors phone and finances. That line hit like a punch. Because it meant my therapist had heard it, I had said it, I had known. My body had known, at least. So Mystery A closed in a way. The relationship lie wasn't just Evan's. It was mine too. The lie I told myself, that I didn't know who I married, was only half true. I knew enough. I just couldn't bear it. Mystery B, the evidence contradiction, had an explanation too, partially. The officer later explained that spoofed calls and cloned devices could create the tower inconsistencies. The hospital supervisor admitted their camera system had a known timestamp sync issue when footage was exported. The jumping timestamps weren't magic. They were technology and human error, exploited by someone who understood how to create confusion. But Mystery C, the unresolved end question, didn't go away. Who was the person in the mask who looked like me? Who had a copy of my insurance card? Was it Evan using a fake card in a disguise? Was it someone helping him? A friend, a relative he lied about? Was it someone from his past looping the pattern forward? And why did the phrase keep appearing from unknown numbers with different voices? Mine, a nurse's, a man's, like it belonged to a system bigger than one marriage. Two mysteries closed in the sense that I understood the pattern. Evan had history, Evan monitored, Evan weaponized my words. The contradictions had plausible technical explanations. But the third mystery, the question of who else was involved, who else was speaking through my phone, who else wore my shape in a hospital lobby, remained like a splinter under the skin. After that hospital footage, the days stopped feeling like days. Time started feeling like a series of notifications, pings, logs, stamps, entries, each one a small door opening into a room I didn't want to enter. The officer warned me about something that sounded simple but wasn't. You're going to start doubting yourself, he said. That's what confusion does. It makes you look inward instead of outward. He told me to write everything down, to screenshot everything, to stop deleting messages out of shame. We don't need perfect, he said. We need patterns. Patterns, the same word my therapist had used, the same word the advocate had used, a word that can be comforting until you realize what it means. This has happened before, and it can happen again. That night I wrote a timeline on my sister's kitchen table, not neat, not linear, more like a frantic map. 12:41 stairs, 1:12 hospital check-in, 1:05 the chart opened, 2:16 security called police, 3:17 bank alerts, 4:58 hotel knock, 6:42 building fob, 1:3 intake under my name. When you look at it like that, it's tempting to treat it like a puzzle, like if you solve it, you'll be safe. But puzzles assume fairness. This didn't. At 10:11 p.m., my sister's doorbell camera notified her. Motion detected. We both froze. Her apartment was on the second floor of a small building. Narrow hallway, painted beige, always smelled like fried onions from someone's kitchen. She opened the app on her phone and turned it toward me so I could see. The video showed the hallway. A man stood outside her door, hood up, hands in pockets. He didn't look at the camera. He looked at the door like he was listening. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He just stood there for 15 seconds, then walked away. The camera caught his profile as he turned. It was Evan. But it could have been the same build, the same confident stride, the same way of moving like a place belonged to him. My mouth went dry. The officer had told me not to assume, but my body assumed anyway. My body didn't care about technicalities. It cared about threat shape. My sister called the officer's number. The officer wasn't on shift. Another officer answered, asked for details, suggested we call 911 if he returned. If he returned, like a weather forecast. I sat on the couch that night, wrist pulsing, and stared at the door until my eyes burned. My phone sat beside me like a trap. At 03:06 a.m. it buzzed. Unknown number. A text, just 2 words, he's close. Then 3 seconds later another, do not let him in. I didn't reply, I didn't dare. My therapist once told me that when you're anxious, your mind searches for control by engaging, texting back, checking, confirming. But engagement can feed the pattern. It can tell whoever is watching that you're watching too. So I didn't answer. I just listened to my sister's building settle, pipes, footsteps, someone's TV turning off, and tried to understand what I was actually afraid of. Evan, or the fact that someone else might be using Evan as a mask. Because those are different fears. One is personal, the other is structural. One is, I married the wrong man. The other is, the world is porous and someone can step into your life if they learn the right words. Day 10:09:14 a.m. The next morning, the officer arranged for me to meet with a digital forensics unit. It sounded like TV. It was. It was a small office with fluorescent lights and 2 people in sweaters who looked tired before the day began. They didn't call themselves experts. They called themselves analysts. Their confidence wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. They asked for my phone. My stomach twisted as I handed it over. It felt like surrendering my only lifeline. Then I realized it had also been my leash. One analyst asked, "Do you have an iCloud backup?" I nodded, yes. "Good," he said. "That means there are logs." Logs again, paperwork's digital cousin. He explained, carefully, that calls from my own number could be the result of spoofing, someone manipulating caller ID information. He explained that voicemails could be routed in weird ways, that carriers keep records, that some anomalies can be traced and some can't. He also explained something that made my stomach drop. If someone has access to your account credentials, he said, they can sometimes interact with your phone services without touching your physical device. Account credentials, passwords, the things Evan had always insisted we share for transparency. The analyst asked if Evan had ever had access to my phone. I laughed bitter. He set it up, I said. He wanted to help. My sister watched me, jaw tight. She knew the truth behind the word help now. The analyst asked for my email addresses, my bank login info, any shared devices. He didn't judge. He didn't lecture. He treated it like a case file, like my shame was irrelevant to the work. That was the first time in weeks I felt something like relief. Someone was treating my fear as data, not drama. At the end of the meeting, he handed me a printed sheet with steps to secure accounts. He said, "Do not reuse passwords," like that was the main problem. Then he paused and said, quieter, "And if someone tells you you're imagining it, don't let that become part of the evidence." If you're still here, you already understand why that sentence matters. Because gaslighting isn't just an argument. It's a tactic that changes what you're willing to call real. Day 11:05:27 p.m. Mass General sent me a bill. That's what made me laugh, actually laugh loud in my sister's kitchen. After all that, after security memos and police logs, I got a bill. $1,476.23. For the x-ray, the brace, the discharge instructions. My sister took it from my shaking hands and said, "We'll call." We called. The billing department was polite and impersonal. They told me my insurance covered some, not all. They told me my deductible applied. They told me that's how it works. Money pressure isn't a background detail in stories like this. It's the ground you're standing on. It's what makes you second-guess leaving. It's what makes you weigh your safety against your bank account like they're comparable. I asked the billing woman if there were any charges associated with the January 3rd intake under my name. She hesitated, then said, "Yes." "How much?" "About 600, she said, "pending insurance." My stomach dropped. Someone had used my identity and left me the bill. I asked, "Can you tell me what services were provided?" She said, "I'm not authorized to." I interrupted, voice shaking. "Someone used my insurance card. Someone checked in as me. You called me. You told me. I need to know." There was a pause. Then she said, "Please hold." The hold music was soft piano. It made me want to scream. When she returned, she said, "It was a triage visit. They left before completing care." "Left like a ghost." I whispered, "Did they give a name?" She said, "It was under your name. That's all I can see." I hung up and felt my chest tighten so hard I thought I might pass out. My sister brought me water, held my shoulder. I realized then how deeply this was affecting my body. My appetite was gone, my sleep was shredded, my chest was always tight like a fist was wrapped around my lungs. I didn't feel like myself. I felt like a sensor constantly scanning for threat. And that's part of what makes control so effective. It doesn't just trap you in a relationship. It rewires your body into a prison. Day 12/01, 3 a.m. Evan didn't contact me directly for 2 days after the hospital interview. Those were the quietest days, and they were the worst. Because quiet makes your mind invent footsteps. At 1:33 a.m., my sister's building door buzzer sounded. Not a ring, just a brief buzz like someone had tried the wrong unit. My sister sat up in bed. I sat up too, heart hammering. We didn't move for a full minute. Then the buzz again. My sister whispered, "I'm calling 911. She did. Transcript: 911 dispatcher. 911, what's your emergency? Transcript: sister. Someone's buzzing our building. My sister has a protective order. We think her husband is trying to get in. Transcript: dispatcher. Is he inside the building? Transcript: sister. No, but... Transcript: dispatcher. Okay, stay inside your unit. Officers are on the way. We waited in the dark with the phone on speaker, listening to the building settle. No footsteps, no knocking, just the hum of the heater and my own pulse in my ears. 10 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. They checked the lobby. They checked the street. They found nothing. One officer shrugged, not unkindly. Could have been a delivery, he said. Could have been a neighbor. Could have, could have. The word that doesn't comfort you when you're living inside maybes. After they left, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my own number. I played it on speaker because my sister insisted, and because I needed someone else to hear it, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Transcript: a low hiss of static, then my own recorded voice clipped flat. Do not let him in. My sister's face drained of color. She whispered, "That's you." I said, "I know." And then faintly behind the recording, a man's voice laughed once. Not loud, not even amused, just satisfied. The message ended. My sister looked at me. "That's not Evan," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. Because if it was Evan, then who had access to my voice? And why did it feel like someone was using it as a key? Day 14/04, 06 p.m. We went back to my apartment building with the officer to collect the rest of my things. The building manager, unnamed, irritated, stood in the hallway, arms crossed, as if my safety planning was an inconvenience. "We can't change the locks without both tenants," he said. "Lease policy." The officer stared at him. "There's a protective order," he said. The manager's mouth tightened. "I understand, but doesn't keep women safe," the advocate said quietly from behind me. She had come with us this time. Her presence felt like armor. The manager relented, but only partly. "We can reprogram the fobs," he said, "but it takes 48 hours. 48 hours is a long time when you're afraid of a man with a key." Inside the apartment, I moved fast, grabbing clothes, books, the framed photo from our wedding that I couldn't decide whether to keep or burn. I found my passport in the drawer where Evan had insisted we keep important documents together. The passport felt heavier than paper. It felt like possibility. In the kitchen, taped under the table, I found a folded piece of notebook paper. My name written on it in block letters. Inside, only one sentence: "Do not let him in." My hands shook so hard I dropped it. It fluttered to the floor like a leaf. The advocate picked it up carefully. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" she asked. I stared at it. I hated that I recognized it. The curve of the D, the hard angle of the N. It looked like mine. My stomach churned. "I don't know," I whispered. The advocate didn't press. She just placed it in a plastic evidence bag the officer had brought, like we were in a different kind of life now. This is the part where your brain tries to protect you by saying, maybe you did write it. Maybe you're making it bigger than it is. But I want you to notice something. Even if I wrote it, it would mean I wrote it because I was afraid. Because my body knew something my pride didn't want to admit. A warning in my own handwriting isn't proof of madness. It's proof of survival. Day 15, 07:52 a.m. The officer obtained a limited set of MBTA station camera footage near our apartment for the night I drove to the hospital. It wasn't like TV where you zoom and enhance and find the villain face. It was grainy. It was angled wrong. It was reality. But there was one clip that stuck in my throat. A camera at the Maverick station entrance showed a man entering at 12:56 a.m. hood up, hands in pockets. He paused near the fare gate and looked down at his phone. The camera caught his face for a second. He looked like Evan. Then 2 minutes later, another man entered. Similar build, similar jacket. He walked with the same confident stride. He paused at the same spot, looked down at his phone in the same way. 2 men, 2 almost Evans. The officer said, "Could be coincidence." I said, "Nothing feels coincidental anymore." The officer didn't argue. He asked if Evan had a twin, a brother, a cousin. I said, "He told me he was an only child." The officer said, "People lie." Yes, they do. But if Evan lied about his family, that's one kind of betrayal. If someone else existed, someone who moved like him, looked like him, then my fear wasn't just about my marriage. It was about a pattern that could replicate. Day 17, 06:31 p.m. The protective order hearing for the extension included a strange detail. Evan's attorney submitted an affidavit claiming Evan had been the victim of identity confusion. That someone had been using his name. That my accusations were based on misattribution. Misattribution, a word that sounds like a typo and feels like a knife. The affidavit claimed Evan had an ongoing issue with someone impersonating him since Ohio. It claimed Evan had reported it. It claimed he had been targeted. Targeted like he was the one with bruises. The judge didn't buy it fully. The order stayed in place. But when I read the affidavit later, alone, my stomach turned because it contained one sentence that felt like it came from my own nightmare. Case note, respondent states, "I am not the only one. Someone else uses my name." The same line Evan had said in the interview room. The same line from the email. If that line was a tactic, it was brilliant. It didn't deny my fear. It redirected it. It turned my story into confusion. It made the court see my reality as unstable. Which is exactly what abuse does. It destabilizes your sense of certainty until even truth looks like a maybe. I don't blame you for doubting this. I wouldn't have either. Day 19, 09:03 p.m. My therapist suggested we talk about memory gaps, dissociation, the way trauma can make your mind go foggy around certain moments. She asked gently, "When you heard Evan at the hotel door, what did you feel in your body?" I said like I was back in my apartment hallway, like time folded. She nodded, and when the front desk said no one was there, I swallowed like I was crazy. She leaned forward. "That's not crazy," she said. "That's your nervous system. It's not a liar, it's a witness." Witness, that word again. I didn't feel like a witness. I felt like evidence. She asked if Evan had ever recorded me without my knowledge. I thought about times he'd held his phone up casually, times he'd taken funny videos, times he'd insisted on voice notes. I didn't know. She asked if he had access to my voicemail settings. I didn't know. Not knowing is part of the suffocation. It's not the presence of a threat, it's the absence of certainty. Day 21, 02:44 a.m. The most frightening moment after the hospital footage didn't involve Evan at all. It happened when I went to the grocery store alone for the first time in weeks. I wore a mask, because winter, because flu season, because anonymity. I kept my head down, grabbed eggs and bread like I was performing normal life. In the checkout line, my phone buzzed with a new message. From my therapist's number. Transcript, "Do not let him in." My stomach dropped. I nearly dropped my basket. My therapist didn't text like that. She didn't text at all. She used the portal. This wasn't her. I stepped out of line and called her office. The receptionist, unnamed, answered and said, "She's in session." I whispered, "Did she just text me?" "No," the receptionist said, confused. "We don't." I hung up shaking. Someone had spoofed my therapist's number now. Someone was widening the circle, touching the few places that felt safe. I went to my car and sat with my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard, because fear had moved into the infrastructure of my life. It wasn't just Evan's voice. It was the world using familiar channels to deliver the same message. Do not let him in. Day 23, 06:18 p.m. The officer obtained one more piece of hospital evidence, a printed visitor access attempt log from the night Evan was removed. It wasn't dramatic. It was a list of entries, scanned IDs, badge swipes, the kind of thing that exists in a system you never notice until you need it. There was an entry for Evan. Case note, male party presented ID, Massachusetts driver license. Name, Evan Trent, DOB, 5021991, ID scanned. DOB, date of birth. I read it and realized something I'd never asked Evan directly. His birthday. We celebrated it, but I'd never checked the number on his license. I asked the officer, "Can I see the scan?" He showed me a black and white image of an ID, grainy, hard to read. But one thing was clear. The photo looked like Evan, but the eyes were wrong, too close together. Or maybe the print quality was bad. Or maybe my mind was searching for differences because it needed an explanation bigger than "my husband is just dangerous." Then the officer said, "The hospital also logged a second access attempt." My throat tightened. Second. He slid another page toward me. Case note, male party. No ID presented, stated relationship, family, stated phrase, "Do not let him in," removed by security. My skin went cold. A male party, no ID, family. And he said the phrase that had been the hospital's warning, like he was using it as a credential. I whispered, "He said it." The officer nodded. "It's in the guard's incident narrative." The guard's narrative, I requested it. I read it later that night, sitting on my sister's couch. Case note, Subject 2 repeated phrase, "Do not let him in," while attempting to pass desk. Subject 2 stated patient asked him to ensure Subject 1 did not enter. Subject 2 became evasive when asked for ID. Subject 2, a second man, a second actor. This was the moment my fear shifted again, because it meant the phrase wasn't just something used against me. It was also something used for me, someone claiming to protect me, someone claiming I had asked him to keep Evan out. A protector narrative. But who was he, and why did he refuse to show ID? Why did he vanish into the night like a rumor? This is the kind of detail that makes you sit up and feel your skin crawl, because it suggests the pattern isn't linear. It's not just Evan chasing me. It's other people stepping in, shaping the story. And the hospital had seen it, documented it, and then filed it away like a routine disturbance. Day 25, 11:09 p.m., that night my sister's neighbor, a quiet man who never introduced himself, knocked on her door. My sister opened it with the chain on. He held up a small envelope. "This was under your door," he said. My sister took it carefully. No return address, just her apartment number in block letters. Inside was a photocopy of my intake form from Mass General, the same one, the phrase circled. And beneath it, handwritten, "You can't keep him out forever." My sister's hands shook. "How did they get this?" she whispered. I didn't answer, because the only answers were worse than silence. Either Evan had access to my records, which would mean a breach bigger than our marriage, or someone in the system, someone with legitimate access, was leaking it. Or subject to, the family man had obtained it. The photocopy had a faint stamp mark at the bottom, Records Department, like it had passed through official hands. I felt nauseous. I couldn't eat. My body went cold and hot in waves. Every time evidence appeared, it carried an emotional consequence. Insomnia, loss of appetite, a tightening in my chest, a trembling in my fingers. The evidence wasn't neutral. It was invasive. Day 28, 08:40 a.m. The officer told me they couldn't identify Subject 2 from hospital footage because he never faced the camera fully. He wore a hat, a mask, a winter coat, like half of Boston in winter. They checked known associates of Evan, coworkers, old friends, no clear match. Evan continued to deny everything. He claimed the voicemails weren't him. He claimed the fake intake wasn't him. He claimed he was being framed. And the system moved slowly, as systems do. But fear doesn't move slowly. Fear lives in the gap between what the system can prove and what your body already knows. By early February, I had a new apartment. I had new passwords. I had a protective order. I had locks and routines and safety plans. But I still had that phrase inside me like a scar. Do not let him in. It had started as a warning about Evan, and somehow it had become a key that strangers could use to enter my life, even from a distance. If you have a theory, keep it quiet for now, because the last thing that happened didn't feel like a crime. It felt like a message delivered by the world itself. Day 30, 12:22 p.m. I tried to go back to work because life doesn't pause for fear. My boss, unnamed, sat me in a glass-walled conference room and asked if I was okay. I could see coworkers walking past, pretending not to look. I told my boss I'd had a family emergency. That phrase is convenient because it's true and vague. It covers everything from illness to violence. It keeps you employed without exposing you. HR asked if I needed resources. They handed me a pamphlet about the Employee Assistance Program, like paper could protect you. I thanked them and smiled because I was still performing normal. Then at 2:14 p.m., I got an email to my work address from an unknown sender. Subject line, RE Visitor Restrictions. My stomach dropped. Inside a single line, tell them you fell. No signature, no threats, just instruction, like someone reminding me what narrative to stick to. I forwarded it to the officer. The officer said, don't respond. I didn't, but the email did what it was designed to do. It made my workplace feel contaminated. It made me look over my shoulder in an office with glass walls. And it made me realize something humiliating. Even after all the evidence, even after the protective order, I still felt the pull to obey. Because obedience had been the easiest way to survive my marriage. It was muscle memory. Day 31, 06:56 p.m. That evening, my sister and I met with a victim's advocate at a community organization. The advocate, unnamed, didn't talk like a cop or a therapist. She talked like someone who had heard every variation of this story and never lost respect for the people in it. She asked me, "What's the part you're most ashamed of?" I froze. Shame questions are like bright lights. I whispered that I stayed, that I protected him, that I still hear his voice and think it's my fault. The advocate nodded slowly. "That's the design," she said. "He built a system where your shame does his work for him." System, design, pattern. Words that made my skin prickle because they sounded like strategy, not chaos. She asked about the phrase. I told her everything, the intake form, the therapy note, the voicemails, subject to. The advocate's eyes narrowed. "It reads like a script," she said. "A script," I whispered. She nodded. "The phrase is simple, memorable. It works as a warning, a threat, and a badge. Whoever is using it knows that. It makes you repeat it in your head. It makes everyone you tell repeat it too." I felt sick because she was right. The phrase had infected my language. My sister and I said it the way you say a name, like it was a person. The advocate said, "We need to be careful that the phrase doesn't become the whole story, because your safety is the story. Your choices are the story." It sounds empowering, but it also felt exhausting. I didn't want to be the story. I wanted to be invisible. Day 33, 03:49 a.m. I woke from a nightmare where I was back in the hospital bay, curtains closing, Evan's voice in the hallway, and the intake form on my chest like a weight. In the dream, the letters "Do not let HIMIN" were stamped on my skin, and every time I tried to scrub them off, they sank deeper. When I woke, my phone screen was lit with a missed call. Unknown number, no voicemail. But on my lock screen, there was a notification from my photo app. New shared album invitation. My stomach dropped. I opened it carefully. The album title was "Do Not Let Him In." There were 2 photos inside. One was a blurry image of my sister's apartment hallway from her doorbell camera. The man with the hood, captured mid-step. The second was a screenshot of my bank account page, showing the $63.48 CVS purchase circled, like someone was proud of it. My hands shook. My skin went cold. This wasn't just harassment. It was curation. It was someone assembling my fear into a gallery, inviting me to look. I showed my sister. She whispered, "Call the officer." "We did," the officer said. "Don't open anything else. Don't click links." We didn't, but it didn't matter. The point was already made. Someone could reach into my phone and leave a breadcrumb, and they knew I would pick it up. Day 34, 08:08 p.m. Evan's attorney requested a modification hearing, claiming Evan needed access to the apartment to retrieve tools essential for work. The request wasn't about tools. It was about presence. It was about forcing me to engage. The judge denied direct access. The officer supervised a property transfer instead. Evan wasn't allowed near me. When Evan arrived at the station parking lot, he looked smaller than he had in my apartment hallway. Not because he had shrunk, but because fluorescent lights and uniforms changed the power dynamics. He carried a duffel bag of tools. He didn't look at me at first. Then he did, and his eyes held mine for half a second, and my body flinched like it remembered the squeeze of his hand on my wrist. He didn't speak to me. He spoke to the officer. "Tell her," he said, voice calm, "that this is going to ruin her." The officer said, "That's enough." Evan smiled at the officer like they were on the same team, like he could charm his way through policy. As he walked back to his car, he did one last thing. He turned his head slightly and said, very softly, almost to himself, "Do not let him in." My skin prickled, my stomach turned. I asked the officer, voice shaking, "Did you hear that?" The officer frowned. "Hear what?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing." Because if I insisted, I would sound like I was hearing ghosts in winter air. And that's what the phrase did. It blurred the line between evidence and perception until you were afraid to report your own reality. If you've ever doubted your own ears because you didn't want to seem dramatic, you already know how this ends for a lot of people. Not with a courtroom victory. With silence. Day 35/06, 17 a.m. The officer told me they had traced one of the unknown numbers to a prepaid line that had been activated with cash. That's where the trail went cold. Not because the officer didn't care, but because there are places the system can't see into, and those places are where fear likes to live. I asked him, "What about subject 2, the man who said the phrase at the hospital?" The officer rubbed his eyes. "We have a blurry angle," he said. "Winter hat, mask, no plate, no ID, nothing." I whispered, "So he just disappears?" The officer nodded. "For now." For now, another maybe. On the walk back to my sister's car, snow crunching under our shoes, my sister said, "Do you think he's real?" I stared at the ground, breath fogging in the air. "Yes," I said, "because the hospital logged him, because the keycard log exists, because the album exists." My sister swallowed. "Then why would he help you? Why would he keep Evan out?" I didn't answer right away, because the answer was the one that made my skin crawl. Sometimes a person doesn't help you to save you. Sometimes they help you to claim you. At home, I opened my email and found a new message in my spam folder. It had slipped past filters because it didn't contain threats. It contained something worse: familiarity. Subject: Winter 2020. Body: "You're doing what she did. She wrote it too." My stomach turned, my hands shook. She, the redacted woman from the 2020 security memo. The message continued. "He learns the sentence from the fear. Fear repeats. Fear makes paper. Paper makes policy. Don't become the paper." It sounded almost poetic, almost like a stranger trying to be profound. But the last line was plain. "Do not let him in. Do not let me in either." I stared at that line for a long time, feeling my throat tighten. Because whoever wrote it knew the shape of my fear well enough to name the second danger, the one I hadn't wanted to admit. That sometimes the thing that rescues you and the thing that stalks you can be the same hand, just turned a different way. This detail seems small, remember it. Because it was the only message that suggested the third mystery wasn't just about Evan or a helper. It was about a pattern that wanted an audience. Day 36/10/02 p.m. I did something I'm not proud of. I drove past our old apartment building, alone, just to see if Evan was there. Not because it was safe. Because my brain wanted a visual confirmation that he still existed in the physical world and hadn't become some voice living in my phone. The street was quiet. Snowbanks lined the curb like frozen waves. Our windows were dark. Then in the lobby I saw movement, a silhouette behind the glass. Someone stepped into the light. A man, winter hat, mask. He held something up to the glass for a second, a sheet of paper. Even from across the street, I could see the bold block letters. "Do not let him in." Then he turned the paper over slowly, like a magician revealing the other side. The back said, "Too late." My hands went numb on the steering wheel. My heart hammered, I couldn't breathe. I drove away so fast I nearly slid at the corner. And the whole time, one thought looped in my head like a siren. If that was Evan, then the third mystery wasn't an extra thread in the story. It was the story. On the ride back to my sister's place, my phone stayed silent, and that silence was its own threat. Because by then, noise had become proof. Silence meant whoever was doing this didn't need to push anymore. They had already planted the phrase in my head, and my head was doing the work for them. I sat in my sister's dark kitchen and wrote the sentence on a blank index card, just to see how it felt to own it instead of fear it. Do not let HIM in. Then I flipped the card over and wrote the only answer that mattered. I will not let you write my life for me. I kept the card in my wallet like a counterspell that wasn't magic, just choice. 11:57 p.m., final turn, weeks later. In late January, when the snow turned to dirty piles and my bruises faded into yellow ghosts, I was approved for a new apartment across town. Small, expensive, barely affordable, but mine. My sister helped me move my boxes. My mother called and cried and said she didn't know. Evan's mother sent one text calling me ungrateful. Evan was arrested for violating the protective order and for fraud-related charges connected to my accounts. His case moved slowly through the system. He posted bail. He was ordered to have no contact. No contact isn't the same as no presence. On my first night in my new apartment, I slept with a chair under the door handle again. Habit, fear furniture. At 03:17 a.m. my phone buzzed. A voicemail notification from my own number. My skin went cold. My body braced like it remembered. I opened it, thumb trembling, and pressed play. Transcript: a soft inhale, a rustle like paper. Then a voice I didn't recognize, female, gentle, almost kind, said, "Do not let him in." And then, after a pause, the same voice added something new, something that made my blood run cold because it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a fact. Transcript: he's already inside.